My description was to have a conversation. My name's Natalie. Thanks for coming. To have a conversation. This is a little more formal than a conversation, but I didn't want to come to this gathering saying what the needs are and how to meet them, but rather having a conversation about what we all think the needs are of our Indigenous people, legally and civilly. So the title so we can, I don't know if we're small enough to do a going around in a circle conversation, but I'd love to hear from everyone, like your name and where you're coming from maybe, and your org, and then we'll get into a conversation. We'll start with.
Good afternoon. I'm Pedro Washtea Face Paradigo Ihanto. I live in Lake Andes and I'm with Brave Heart Society, one of the Kushi. Glad to be here.
Woo!
Hey, I'm Judy Honeymichael. I'm from the Brave Heart Society also. I'm from Wagner.
Oh.
I'm Allison Reddenville. I organize with a Stop the Water Initiative. Work pretty closely with Natalie. And then I also am with Dakotas for America. I am Sisseton and Hunkpapa Lakota from Sisseton, but I live in Sioux Falls and organize within social justice structures, GOTV, intergovernmental outreach, and advocacy for a lot of stuff, actually. We'll get into that with Natalie's conversation as well.
My name is Rosebud White Plume. I'm from Oyukupe territory on the Pioneer Indian Reservation, and I'm with Oayaku International.
Me?
Sure.
I'm Sharon Nohart, and I'm from Standing Rock Reservation. My maiden name is Archambault, and I'm with Coup Council. We're our organization is in Rapid City, and what we're trying to do is acquire land to build homes and tiny homes for our people that are homeless. So,
We can start.
Me? Or-
Yes, let's go with you and then we'll circle around.
My name is Nicole Bearfield, and I work with the South Dakota Coalition Ending Domestic and Sexual Violence.
Is that done?
Hey, good afternoon. My name is Johnny Salazar. I serve as the general manager for Seventh Generation Fund, and I'm happy to be here.
My name's Stone Wallace. I work with Seventh Generation Fund. I'm the affiliate coordinator.
And my name is Kimberly Brown. I'm the fiscal coordinator for Seventh Generation Fund.
Hi. I only Zoom and conference call with people in Indigenouse,
Okay, my name is Ethel Swallow. I am from Wounded Knee and Pine Ridge Reservation. I work with Maggie's House. We help 17 to 22-year-olds. And we do life skills and things with them. But I'm just interested in your presentation, so I came in.
I'm Norma Rendon Machiapie, La Cole Chiapi, Wachiampiwi. I'm from Ogallala originally, but I live in Porcupine now for 30-some years. But we we have a shelter for women, children, and suffering from or experiencing domestic violence, sexual assault, and sex trafficking. And name of our program is Where All Women Are Honored. Wio Wichayu Oniha Oyanke. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Amy Sazu. I'm Sichangun, Oglala, Lakota. I live in Rapid, and I'm the executive director for the Remembering the Children Memorial Project.
I'm Kirk Branch. I'm on the Hopa Mountain Board of Directors. I'm from Bozeman.
Did you want to? Cousin, can you introduce yourself and then we'll come back to the
My name is Tasha Hisla.
I'm the director of Wachiampi from Crow Creek Sioux Tribe, and my program is advocating for missing and murdered Indigenous relatives, and also the Youth Council.
You're next, my dear.
I'm Batman.
How mitakiapi chante washte na pechiuzapi chanupa maniwi imonchapi. Walks with the Pipe Woman. Good afternoon, relatives. We are Uniting Resilience. My name is Monique Muffy Musso. We are from originally from the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation, Oglala, Lakota, and we just love everybody. Uniting Resilience Organization, we're here to honor Natalie today. Go ahead.
Hello, I'm Filippo De Leon Musso, and I am with Uniting Resilience. I'm a board member.
My name is Marlene Jamie Donlife, but I prefer to be called Jamie. I am currently an office coordinator for Generations Indigenous Ways, and I help Helene coordinate our summer camps. I'm from Wombly. I live there with my mom and my son.
Oh, all right, well, welcome. Thank you, everybody, for coming today. I wanted to share just some of my thoughts, because the way this was presented was like a conversation, and I think that this is a little bit different. And then my laptop decided to give out 2 days ago, so it's at my repair shop guy. It's just a guy. It's not like a shop. But he's helping me. So we'll get that taken care of. It's in the north side of Rapid City right now. And it's recovering. But obviously, I'll share a little bit about my background. My name's Natalie Stites-Means. I have a Juris Doctor from the UCLA School of Law that I got back in 2007. I studied public interest law and policy and got some sort of certificate or presentation. So, I don't know, something. Designation, I got to wear a robe when I graduated. So I have some, oh wow, big group just came in. Welcome, come in. And anyway, I tried to make a career in law and policy, basically. And since law school graduation, I also specialized in federal Indian law and tribal law during my studies. And it was then, after being raised in Southern California, wow, it's on now. After law school, or during law school, I interned with my tribe, which is the Cheyenne River Sioux tribe. I also have strong ties to Crow Creek, the Crow Creek Dakota. My mom lives in Fort Thompson. A lot of people wonder who I am. I've only been here for the last 12 years. In terms of being in South Dakota, and hello, does that work? Cool, okay. And in 2005, I came and I interned with my own tribe, the legal department at the Cheyenne in Eagle Butte. And it was that summer that I got training from Rosebud's mother at the School of Liberation for Lakota freedom fighters. And so Tui Deb White Plume was very much a part of my consciousness, political consciousness that developed. And I also, really importantly to me, is I was hunkad by the Flying Earth Locks on Standing Rock. And so, and my Lakota name that I got as an adult is Wo'awachi Sutanwi, which was taken or interpreted to me to mean that I am a woman of strong fortitude. And the reason I was given that name was because I told everybody all through college and internships and law school that I would return to South Dakota to help my people. It was really simple to me. My grandma Pauline thought I would become an FBI agent, which is sort of funny if you know me now. And I didn't do that, obviously, and I have shied away from law enforcement. But it was working for tribal governments. I worked for Cheyenne River Sioux Tribe, and then I worked over at the Rosebud Sioux Tribe. And because of my law background, I still wanted to be a lawyer at that time. And a number of personal crises that I never thought I would experience happened to me. I lost a premature baby in 2010, literally on the same day that I should have sat for the bar examination. And so like overcoming that trauma and like coping with it, which it still is there and will always be with me. And I know, and the way I approach all of our people is that we all have endured so much, that we all deserve kindness, we all deserve respect, and I'm not going to wait for someone to tell me their whole life story to know how hard things can be. My first question when I'm asked about legal issues is, do you have any money? That's what people come to me and they ask me for advice, and by this time, I think that I've probably talked to over 1,000 victims of violent crime, of women whose children are in the foster care system, of women who are victims of violence in some way, children. I often speak with the unchis, the aunties, and the moms who are concerned about their other relatives. And sometimes I get a call on people's worst days, the worst day of their life. Their daughter is missing or has been sexually assaulted. It was at the Rosebud Sioux Tribe, I went and worked for the Defending Childhood Initiative, which was like a big deal nationally. It was about children exposed to violence, and that was started in the domestic violence movement. Tilly Black Bear of Rosebud, of course, being a foremother, a founding mother of that movement nationally. And we continued that work at Rosebud, trying to identify how to address these complex legal issues in our communities, in our tribal communities. I remember we started to collect data of all the 27 agencies in play at Rosebud, including the U.S. attorneys and FBI victim assistance. And we concluded, just based on the fact that, say, we found out that 1/4 of the court docket at the Rosebud Sioux Tribal Court involved children as victims of violent crime. Over 2,000, actually. When we started to share this information, because we also had providers who were like surveying the reservation and calling like 800 families. The families identified as source of violence, number one was their schools. What we were talking about was not school violence, school-based violence. This was all family and domestic-based violence. When we started to present this information to the communities, and we went out to all the different, there's 20 communities on Rosebud, we took it to tribal council, and it was like really difficult to share this information in a scientific or information and factual objective way as the law requires. I worked for the Attorney General on this project with the children. And one of our elders in the community, she thought that we were calling every person on Rosebud a child abuser. That was her takeaway. And I realized that you have to be so careful when you're talking about violence and you're talking about good and evil and you're talking about bad and good. I think there's like a huge emergency because the title of this workshop appealed to me. I didn't come up with it, Bonnie and Helene did, and it was surveyed, I found out, from the Strengthening the Circle folks. Everyone was surveyed on what they thought were important topics to talk about. And this was one of them, was the civil and legal needs of Indian country, of indigenous people. And I thought that was really appealing to me, personally, based on the work that we do. Because the legal and civil needs are enormous, and they will not be met. Full stop. There will be no army of clinical mental health professionals. There will be no army of lawyers coming in to assist the Indigenous people of South Dakota, or the Great Plains, or all throughout the Indian country. And so in that sense, how do we address these enormous needs? How do we address our civil needs as well? So the first question is, do you have money? When people talk to me on their worst days. When people talk to me about what's happened at their workplaces. People get punched in the face, they get sexually assaulted by supervisors. This is not unusual. This is an everyday narrative of what the legal needs and injuries are to our people. And personally, I have come to reject the notion that we need to approach it from the idea, particularly we find in the domestic violence movement, the MMIW movement, is the idea that perpetrators are largely non-native. Now, that's just not what it is. Most of us as relatives and family members experience violence where we live. In our homes, the places we go every day, the workplace, our homes, the schools, when I was working on the children exposed to violence, that's when I started to see that this violence against the people was rooted in the violence against the earth. And the rape of Mother Earth is why so many of our people are being raped every day. And it was like that sort of shook me because I had this legalistic training and I was going to be a lawyer and lawsuits could solve problems, right? And I came to an understanding, and Tui Faith was part of helping me to understand that through the Braveheart Society when she began to organize against the KXL. And I started to see it more holistically and intersectionally what this meant, what our needs are. What does it mean to need, even? What do we need? Mother Earth provides for all, right? But here we are in capitalism chasing that dollar for our basic needs. So I wanted to just share that there's multiple levels to our civil and our legal needs. And a lot of people wait until they're injured. They wait until they need that lawyer. And they didn't pay attention beforehand, much like people who are working on MMIW, right? You don't really know until someone you love and care about is missing. And all of us have relatives. All of us do. But when it's someone in your household, when it's your daughter, or your auntie, or your sister, that's when the shit hits the fan, so to speak. And then you're seeking that assistance, and it's nowhere to be found. There's 3,000, maybe 3,500 lawyers for 888,000 people in South Dakota. When Standing Rock, I mentioned the rape against the earth because it was the work on the KXL that led me then to go up to Standing Rock in 2016 and begin to make bigger understandings about the world we live in and how to solve the problems that face us and how to address our needs. The average Indian knows way more about federal Indian law than the average lawyer. The average lawyer thinks we're dead and gone. The average lawyer has very little knowledge about. And there's so few attorneys to address our needs. And there's also an illusion of a legal representation in South Dakota because of the public defenders, right? The federal public defenders and the county public defenders give an illusion in a criminal proceeding or in a child abuse and neglect proceeding that one is being represented. And we know that that's just not the situation in terms of public defense. Like on the streets, they call them public defenders or public pretenders. Public pretenders, I was like, I was still trying to be a lawyer when they told me about that. But, and then, of course, not a lawyer, but a liar, right? Um, and there's just simply not going to be enough lawyers. Now, the unique thing about in South Dakota is that we're legally entitled to represent ourselves. It's called pro se. And one way we can talk about meeting our legal needs is to train and educate around what does it mean to represent yourself? What does it mean to stand up in these courtrooms and participate in these proceedings, whether as a victim or in a criminal defense? I listed and these would all be in like nice little slides if I had my laptop, but the legal services needs are so extensive. You look at child custody, you look at criminal defense and prosecution, you look at financial. The debts, in particular medical debts. We need legal services around those. We need corporate legal services and organizational legal services. I mean, I'm lucky that every day I talk to lawyers because those are my buddies, and they give me legal advice all day on how to conduct myself organizationally. And 3 years ago, I founded the HESAPA Voter Initiative, which sort of turned into this Meals for Relatives mutual aid that a lot of us here actually all participated in or helped out in or cooked in. And to organize our people, we served like over 2,000 people that we logged. We fed them for weeks at a time and gave them goods and supplies to survive the pandemic when there was no vaccines and where people didn't see or know. And today, in 2022, we know that in the last 2 years as Indigenous people, we lost 6 years of life expectancy. 6 years. We are like a white guy in the 1940s in America, in terms of health outcomes, in terms of the age groups that are dying. It's not just our families, it's our Facebook feeds. Sometimes I'm like, but it's not in our imagination, and it's no accident. Early on in the COVID pandemic, we were fully aware, and there were people predicting the outcomes around Indigenous loss of life and disease in the future now. We're looking at long COVID, we're looking at a disabled population. We're looking at people, right? We have our school-age population in RSV and pneumonia going off the charts. And there even is a study indicating that child survivors of COVID are being diagnosed with diabetes. And, the way in which this is played out is just the pandemic has exposed these great needs that we have. And the reason why they were able to skirt a public health response here in South Dakota and pretend. And huge amounts of fraud. So there's another legal services need in our own communities and in the mainstream ones. White collar crime. This is a huge issue. We need lawyers to do that, but they're not coming. We need to get trained in that. We need to have lay advocates. We need to have people willing to go up and stand up against the judiciary and these prosecutors and the Department of Social Services. I just heard some data from Carmen O'Leary the other day. Some of you might know her. She's from Cheyenne River. She said that the same number of children who went through the boarding schools are going through the foster care system. So that is like really, besides domestic violence victims, for me as a woman and in my sort of career trajectory and the networks, I always hear from mothers whose children have been taken. I always hear from grandmothers who are seeking out a way to get their children back. And I've only heard of it happening twice. I've talked to hundreds. Twice where grandma got the kids right out the gate. And I've never heard it happening without someone having political pull. Political pull. And I'll say Jean Roach because she's come public with what she's endured. She'll post about it. She'll put you all on blast if you come at her. And she's an organizer in Rapid City. And she has successfully fought off DSS and got her grandchildren back in their homes. For all these legal needs and legal services that are at stake in our community, there's so much lawlessness. And that takes me to the idea of our civil needs. And what does it mean to participate civically? Many people associate civil rights. I think probably that might have been sort of what generated the topic of this conversation, me talking at you. But the civil, to me, goes to civic as well, right? We don't have people in those rooms and sitting at those tables because they'll wait us out. You know, I don't have time to make it a hobby to go to your meetings. What I can do is offer my persistent and aggressive advocacy to let you know what the solutions are, because there's no secret to the solutions. This is that MMRW, we need more data. No, we don't. We don't need more data. What we need is cops to stop being in the drug game and trafficking our women, especially in Pennington County. We certainly need that. You know, I'm sorry I'm turning my back, but I just want to try to make sure that I cover these legal services and the civic needs. I want to also acknowledge that landlord-tenant, the instability of housing. Now, in that instance, you say, do you have money? And the tenant will say, yes, I do. I've been calling everywhere to try to get a lawyer because my landlord is crazy and trying to evict me for no reason. And there's no attorneys who take those cases. There's just not. Again, there's not going to be no lawyers with the easy fix or the quick solutions for the problems that we face in terms of our legal and civil needs. There's also the need, you know, there's the simple legal services approach. You know, we need family law, we need child welfare, DSS, we need criminal defense, we need criminal prosecutors responsive to our victims. If you look at the women in Pennington County Jail, most of them are victims of crime. And concurrently, they're in there because they're being victimized, and they're the ones who get put in jail. They're often being trafficked these days. And you look at the women in there, many of them are postpartum. They just had babies, and they're not getting the services that they need. The maternal mortality rates in South Dakota. Our people need healthcare lawyers. Our people need lawyers sitting with them in these hospitals when they get these procedures and when we have children, and when we trust our lives and bodies to these medical professionals. We need lawyers at every juncture. We have legal needs at every juncture. We are Indian people, and we're not just race groups and cultural groups and ethnic groups. We are political people who walk in this world. And the absence of these lawyers, like North Dakota is even worse. You'd think with all that oil, they'd have more lawyers, but they only have like 1,500. We found that out during Standing Rock. I was sort of part of a little crew of people, lawyers who were responding, myself not being a lawyer, but just knowing all the lawyers and dynamics and having that background, I kind of got sucked into it. And then I saw what ridiculousness was going on in terms of acting like there were going to be some superhero lawyers coming in and swinging on their capes and making sure that 700 water protectors facing all these criminal charges would be addressed. That didn't happen. You know, there's the simple approach, and then there's the complex legal system that we find ourselves facing at every juncture. A little girl, 14 years old, was hit and run on the streets of Rapid City a week and 2 days ago, Nevaeh Braveheart. She was 14 years old. It was a hit and run, and white man just took off. Young white man, now we know. He just left. Lawlessness, right? Nobody even feels like it. They need to stop if they kill an Indian youth on these streets. And the first sort of public social media response to that seemed to be, what was she doing out at midnight? That's a sensible conversation. But my bigger question was, why the hell did she get hit and that person leave? Let's talk about that first. And she was killed. And the family could not even have an open casket because the damage was so bad. And that man was on the run for like 3 or 4 days, and people assisted him, painting his vehicle, changing his tires. You know, lawlessness is going on. So is that our legal need as Indigenous people? Yes, because we're more likely to be victimized. The narrative is that we're more likely to be the defendant or the perpetrator, right? But I think our perpetrators are entitled to criminal defense as well. Our bodies make a lot of money. Our Indigenous people's bodies here, when we're in the hospital, when we're in foster care, when we're in prison, we make money for the government. We make money for all these people in South Dakota on the front line of state government that are engaging in unlawful discriminatory practices on a constant basis. You know, this is not an if, this is when. But when we talk about simple legal services, you think about Dakota Plains Legal Services, right? Or you think about your public defender, or you think that the ACLU is going to come in and represent you. And lucky people get that. A couple of people do. But the ACLU it doesn't have enough attorneys to service our needs. And then, right, if you're working on the reservation, you go to your tribe's lawyer or your tribe's counsel, their law firm, or you go to the attorney general or the chief prosecutor. But they're not there to represent the people. They're there to represent the tribe, the government. And to keep in mind that one of the reasons I did not continue to pursue wasn't just because of personal trauma and crisis, which is not unusual, but it also was because you have to swear an oath of allegiance, not just to the United States, but to the state of South Dakota, and whatever state that you decide to practice in. This is true across most licensed professions. You swear an oath to these state and legal entities. You know, some people don't take that oath seriously. I had to swear an oath to the state of South Dakota when I got a job working for University of Oklahoma at the Indian Country Child Trauma Center. And all I was doing was like coordinating webinars and like, you know, trying to get information out about what trauma-informed approaches and trauma-informed care means. We still had to swear an oath to Oklahoma. So when they offered me a promotion to move down to another red state, I had to gracefully decline. I didn't see how Oklahoma would be any better than Rapid City, South Dakota. But the complex legal system approach is looking at like how the various ways, I brought up Nevaeh because her father was gunned down by the Oglala Public Safety Department. He was killed by police officers in Pine Ridge about 4 years ago, I think. So here we have a Lakota man killed by police, and he's not there to protect his daughter. He's dead. And his daughter is run over by a white man on the streets, no less. So the lawlessness, right, it permeates. There's no accountability. There's no accountability for excessive force. So these issues around police brutality and DSS, child removal, what I call child trafficking. These issues never have any legal representation, even no matter how you look at it. No one can go to a lawyer and get representation who's a Native American for an excessive force claim against the police, any police department. And one of the ways, because I know people have sued our counties and cities in South Dakota for civil rights violations or voting rights violations. I know people suing them now. What they do, the cities and counties, is they have an insurance pool in Pierre. They all pitch in, all 66 counties, and they are able to litigate endlessly. Because us little guys with our pro bono attorneys, if we're lucky, we can't. We can't litigate, we can't be in the courtroom paying for our lawyers. The one we might be lucky to have. We can't do that for years, right? We can't meet those needs. So the cities and counties are always like able to out-litigate. And I'm looking at Mashke Amy here because I know she knows some of that history. When the lands of Suzanne and the Rapid City Indian Boarding School, Heather Dawn Thompson is an attorney who sort of took that on as her project, and the city and county said, and the church and the hospital said, sue us. We're waiting for it. And all of this in the last 6 years has been about negotiating around that because we can't afford to sue endlessly with the city and county. And we can't afford to let these lands fall into, yet again, more unlawful hands. Because the church is there, the hospital's there, and then we even have a couple private landowners out there. It's a beautiful part of town. A lot of us has gone up there. But even with the lawyer, 1, 2, 4 involved, litigation is not a solution, right? So then we go back to the civic. We go back to the fact that lawsuits are about applying the law, and courts interpret the law. Where we need to get in on is making the law. So the civic participation, running for office and being able to get in there. And also participating in endless meetings, that might seem like a waste of time. But it is in the public policy, because it's not just about the law. This is illegal, this happened to me and it's illegal. I know the 18 lawsuits that were dismissed in South Dakota in 2011 of boarding school survivors who were living and who had current injury due to the child abuse they suffered at Catholic priests and the Catholic staff, an old chappie at effing St. Francis. The documentation was there, the lawsuits were there, they had out-of-state lawyers coming in who'd already worked on boarding school cases in other places, who had already been experienced suing the Catholic Church in Louisiana where it started. It wasn't Indian, right? It was. And what did the state of South Dakota do? They limited the ability of boarding school survivors to file claims. One of the few jurisdictions in the United States, while other states and jurisdictions were making the good public policy decision to allow the victims of priests and the Catholic Church, they were making laws to make it easier for victims to file claims against the Catholic Church. And South Dakota made it harder and dismissed all those lawsuits. In this really shady decision, the Supreme Court applied the law that had just been passed. So we have like a good old boy network. We have South Dakota, and I speak to South Dakota because it's where I live, it's where my people live, and I know what's going on nationally. I know that Rapid City is like Oakland when it comes to police brutality. I know that it's getting like Chicago in terms of gun violence. We know that when we look at ourselves per capita or proportionally, it's crazy. There's more murders on Oglala than there is in New York City, proportionally. And I'm not doing that to single out because I don't think that's very helpful. It's just that that's the data that I can share with you. I wanted to also note that it's like embedded. I want to make a note about sort of the ideas and the concepts around our legal needs and what they might be, because many people think that we have to pick treaty first. It's our treaty rights. But treaty rights are just one of many different kind of rights, and actually treaties are unique because they talk about duties and obligations to one another. The Great Sioux Nation in our case, and the United States, right? The civil rights idea is that to enforce the rights that are embedded in the U.S. Constitution for any man and the white propertied man. So the civil rights doctrine and the way that works out is what we face like in the news when we see their new decision against people of color in some way. And more to come. what we see is that they've slowly eroded it. So like, you know, there's a whole analysis around equal protection that goes to the civil rights regime. It's not so much seen as a remedy for natives, because the other regime or doctrine or concept that we deal with is going back to the idea of the treaty is federal Indian law. So that's why you have the Major Crimes Acts. That's why when our people deal drugs on the res, they get hard time in the federal pen. They don't get the same thing that stateside does. That's just sentencing disparity between the feds and the state is very, very well documented. And I also wanted to bring up, because I think it's so important, is the idea of human rights. The idea of human rights stems from a concept of international law, that there are international norms that one must abide by in order to be lawful, in order to be participating among the country of nations. And when I went to the Lakota, the School of Liberation for Lakota Freedom Fighters, the UN Declaration for Indigenous Peoples was still in draft form. And there were people there, Kent, Deb, Alex, who all said, I don't think they're gonna pass it before I die, but I'm still gonna work on this. But they did, they passed it. And it sets out international norms that we know South Dakota does not adhere to. So I want to be very clear about that. Hi, Gloria. Is that South Dakota is in an ongoing state of genocide against us, and genocide is unlawful. The racial transfer of children from Indian families to white ones is unlawful, because it's a racially based transfer. They're seeking to end our families so we cannot continue as a people. When you have a fourth of your people being investigated for abuse and neglect by Washichu authorities, that erodes our families. And it is considered an act of genocide. So I often will go to those. Now, can we go into a courtroom and enforce that? Maybe if we go to Geneva, go to The Hague. And I know we've had court cases pending before them, but again, do we have the funds to do that? Do we have the funds to fly everyone into The Hague? No, we don't. So in terms of like making law, I also want to talk about the victims. I know that a lot of people here work with victims as well. And there is the important point that the Constitution is embedded with a bias to the defendant, to the accused, to the presumed innocent. It is not for the victims. The people are represented by a prosecutor and by police, particularly around, MMIW and around domestic violence. They do not represent the victim. Some of them might take it up. Victims' rights laws have proliferated. But now in South Dakota, Marcy's law, problematic, I know. Some of y'all working on that stuff in Pierre. But Marcy's law is used to protect police involved in shootings now. And they cloak the identity of the shooting cop. I wish Allison just walked out. She's working on it right now. And a recent shooting of Jacob James in Sioux Falls by the police. He was shot 21 times. And you don't know who the cops who did it. Because they won't release the names because they say the cop is a victim. So good, we have a law in the books, we got that passed, but now we got victims' rights for police officers because they're being interpreted to mean that they too are victims. We've seen this really insidious and harmful interpretation of victimization in our own Pennington County. We saw it when they were considering cops who'd been through traumatic experiences as much as entitled to resources devoted to addressing racial equity. Racial equity and healing. No, the cops got that money for themselves because they're victims too, right? I bring that up because I want you to see the shortcomings of the law. It's one thing if all these things were enforced. Follow the rules on the books would be good. But then you even have the way in which laws are interpreted to benefit the oppressive people. They're there to benefit the people who are in power. I think every nonprofit organization should look to how they can provide legal services within their scope of work. Because how can you work with people when they're hungry? How can you work with people when their daughter just got raped? You know, and I share these stories, probably we should be smudging, we should be talking about these things, but I'm sharing them in this really clinical way because it's the only way I can do it without, I didn't feel comfortable sharing that, you know, but I put myself out there because I knew it would help people, I knew it would work, and it was our way. And it was literally spiritual advice from a ceremony. They said, get the bare root and get the cedar. And not everyone knew people in those ceremonies. So as someone who knew them and was advised, and they brought me the medicine, I shared it with my people. I shared my philosophies around food. When I share my philosophies around those things, then you're acting like the good Indian, right? And it's very much more receptive. Everyone's smiling at you. You know, it's all hearts on your life.
Good little Indian.
Good little Indians. And it's that receptiveness to these stereotypes, you know, at least in my experience. Because I've been going off about violence for, 12 years now, 13 years. I've been going off about police brutality in different ways. And, when I say going off, I'm not just talking about the Facebook stuff. I'm picking up a phone call and getting in a down fight with the local sheriff. It means calling board members. It means calling the people, because every single state entity office has a sleeper. There's always a native in there. They might be the admin clerk, but they're always someone. So always keep that in mind in navigating these legal issues. 105 rapes were reported in 2021 in South Dakota, in Pennington County, and only 5 were resolved out of 105. This is all data that you can look up. It's not white, but you gotta tab it, and you're on your broken iPhone, and you're reading a 150-page report, but that's what I do so that I can talk knowledgeably about what's going on. And they don't give an F about us. It is up to us to care about us. And to that end, training people to advocate for themselves and to assert their rights to self-defense, to assert their rights to pro se representation in courtroom proceedings is one way that we can address the great legal needs. Another way is to participate like our water protectors do, the Clean Water Alliance, the Black Hills Group, everyone, Uniting Resilience. You participate in all the regulatory meetings where they're trying to have them off in friggin' Piedmont, right? Or somewhere up here where no regular Indian from Rapid City can get to very easily, to make sure to participate and register those things. That's your civic participation. Hanging out at the front end of the laws is sometimes helpful.
Do you have time for questions?
Yes. Yeah, because I'm on my last note, eh? And I also want to know, though, about tribal legal systems, is that we can build them a lot better on our tribal governments. It was up, as you know, November 8th before the U.S. Supreme Court, and we're probably looking at a scaling back of the Indian child welfare. But if any of us in South Dakota know of these 9 tribes, have we ever seen EQUA fully implemented? No, we haven't. We've never seen robust cares about reunification, parent training, adherence to case plans. And the saddest thing is that you can do everything and still not get those kids back in your family. You can jump through every hoop. Hoop's on fire, you're jumping through it. I've seen it time and time again. We have to prevent, as much as we can, those incidents that happen that lead to it. And it's always a law enforcement. And it's usually a drug or alcohol related. It really is. That's 80% of law enforcement interventions in South Dakota and on the reservations are due to that. That make us vulnerable. I feel on point all the time in Rapid City. I have to be on point every time, 24/7. That stress. All our organizations need to address that stress so we can go up in these courtrooms and fight the fight, so we can go to these hearings and make our statements and share our heart and our experiences and our trauma and our suffering, but for a purpose. You know, oh, no gas money, you're supposed to show up. You know, all these meetings at 6 o'clock, and I'm always like, women, do y'all cook for your family anymore? Because all my family's hungry at 6. I'm still either planning out meals or trying to deal with how will I addressing my family needs to go out and participate in these things, you know. That all needs to be considered, and through my own organizing efforts, I have found that if Lakota women are in the lead in making the decisions, it works. When women and Two Spirits are working, we don't have time for bullshit. We got kids to feed. We have to deal with all these layers of our existence in life. And we need to create the spaces for that. Part of our community group is a birth circle. That's why we're looking at the women in jail and how they're all postpartum. You know, you look at the women committing real violent crime, they're often postpartum. They don't have the support for their mental health. They don't have the support for the C-section they went through, that they rushed through in the hospital. So, I'm going to leave that here so that we can have some questions and comments before we conclude. And happy to have this conversation. And I would note too on the healing approaches within your organization, the training of people to advocate for themselves. And if you can, raise yourself a lawyer. People who become lawyers, they are nourished and nurtured. I didn't become a lawyer, but everyone I know who has, who comes from a poor working class background, they come from the dirt, so to speak, from the salt of the earth, from the cactus in our head. Those folks who persevere, they are nurtured, and you bring up your child. I'm bringing up my child to be a leader. I'm bringing up my child to get educated. I'm protecting every bit I can. Stresses me out though, because I know that her friends might not have that. Her cousins don't have that, you know. But if you can, let's nurture those babies to be these leaders that we need. Because they're going to be 20 years old before we know it. You know, and what we wish we knew what we know now, right? I'm like, why did I spend so much time at law school happy hour? It didn't even do nothing. It didn't help. Help no one, advance no one, you know? How much time did I spend in dumb relationships? So much of what I see and our exposure as women to violence is in these romantic ideas and notions that have nothing to do with reality. But we're still trying to force it. You know, I try to, girls, let me tell you. Let me tell you what's really going on here. You don't need that bad. You know, my husband teases me though. Because he's like, oh, is this hate man time? Yes, it is, every day. You're the exception. You're the exception. My biggest Facebook suspension was because I put all men are trash but you, babe. But boom, got yanked for like long time. I had to make another profile. the gender dynamics. But okay, I want to respectfully leave comments now and anything that comes to mind. And if there's anything you think that I could address or answer, I sure will, you know. But don't make me talk about individual lawyers. Message me that, text.
Natalie, I just want to say thank you. You're the best. You're awesome. You're really strong on the women, the matriarchal. I want to really come from a solution. I really want to come at a solution-based, because if you look in this room right now, 98% female. And anywhere that we have gone, it's been that. And when we go into the decision-making buildings where the structural, straight line, white man constitutional law, 100% of those decision makers are men. Old, white men. I don't take nothing from our current and this generation and the next generation, Wichashas, Itachas, men. warriors. But, you know, they never even recognized us on that Constitution. So every single tribe has sovereignty, and none of those treaties were ever signed by a woman. So we're still free in accordance to the natural Mother Earth law. And the solution to this, would you recommend going back to the IRA governments and bringing in the women to change the laws that the men are currently following of the Constitution? Because in accordance to our Two-Spirit, you know, that came from Bear Butte. And I don't know a lot of you in here, but in a cultural sense, a pipe came down from the butte into my hands. And that's what started my wife and I in 2019 to do the laws for hate crime protection for our native Two-Spirit and LGBTQ. And then it just swarmed out across South Dakota, so we have 4 tribes now of the Ocheti Shakoi. And we just haven't gone back to the other 5 because we got COVID, or we didn't get COVID, but COVID hit, and we got busy on some other stuff. But I feel the solution is to have women from their tribes start changing these laws. Because these current laws that these white men made, and that our warriors, our men at home, the police officers, they're not doing anything to help us. And nothing has changed. I've been on this earth 54 years and I have not seen any kind of change for women. In fact, it's gotten worse. Look at the MMIP. Look at how bad that's gotten. Look at the boarding schools. That big trauma generational thing that's hitting and it's coming out. Where are those laws? So I would like to thank you so much, and if in some way encourage women to keep standing up and keep encouraging each other and uplifting each other in any way we can. And one of the biggest things that you know I pray about a lot is that we stop the internal violence and we all work together. And I really want to, and I talked about this at our table today, but me and my wife have been talking about this for the 17 years that we've been together, and that's we need to stop gossiping. Because white men gave that to our Indian men. And Indian men, you gossip more than women. But that's the truth. I mean, I'm not going to tell you something that I haven't experienced and I don't know, because I knew my white police officer friends and my Indian police officer friends that are men. And they knew more than I did. And that's the truth, and that's a fact. And we need to stop the gossiping. Gossiping, for me, is judgmental. And you know, I came from Bear Butte with a pipe, walking and trying to ask everyone, stop judging. Stop judging each other, others, all around us. Because Mother Earth is crying and she needs us. And we got to change the laws within our own tribes, the IRA. I really, really think this woman is top notch. Thank you, Natalie.
Thank you, Murphy. Thank you, Murphy. Yes, and yes, and yes. And on that, it's like, I'm not prescriptive. I don't think, I have some recommendations, some ideas for solutions. I believe we can solve our own problems. I believe that we deserve resources to do that. We don't have enough. Lot of philanthropy staff will spend their time making brochures. And I'm like, we don't need a brochure, man. Although sometimes they come in handy, because I'll be like, we need a brochure for that. But in terms of those actual services, the thing, if you want the mic, come on up, or you could just yell.
Start yelling around the room.
Yeah, this is Allison. Go ahead.
Hi, everybody. My name is Allison Renville. I'm an organizer out of Sioux Falls. One of the things that I wanted to ask you, Natalie, about is if you could maybe kind of not necessarily just tips or but what's your experience in trying to explain the timeline of response when it comes to responding to trauma? You know, we're all responding as a trauma response, as we've learned from phase around all of this stuff. It was kind of a token expression we all had to get used to. But, you know, there's no one in this room that hasn't experienced trauma around the boarding schools, around sexual assault, domestic violence, alcoholism, physical assault. And so, you know, there's an entire generation who are, you know, as our friend Desiree likes to say, that we're gushing blood all over the place because we continue to function with an open wound rather than letting it scar over. Families don't understand that it's not, or from my experience, and because I'm just now getting into responding to a public execution of one of our charter members in Sioux Falls. They shot at him over 21 and a half times, and they hit him 4 or 5 times or so, and they shot him when his hands were empty. He had no gun on him, and the fatal shot was while he was on the ground. One thing that I've had to learn, and I'm curious what your thoughts are on this, because we're all responding to trauma and crisis. How do we control ourselves with not completely disassociating to the situation in order to facilitate that timeline a little better? Because, you know, the cops aren't going to respond in 72 hours. They're not going to respond in a month. This is our 9th week. It's taken the last month and a half to get a response from the press releases and the letters that we sent out. So, you know, like, how do you go about keeping yourself safe from the secondhand trauma, but also managing the victims and the families who are left with generally no answers. You know, they're always going to have more questions than answers. And so, you know, how do we as organizers, or how do we as people in these spaces regulate like the managing of that timeline and then be able to articulate that to victims?
Mm-hmm. That's a heavy question, Allison. Thanks for prepping me. Thanks for warning on that one. You know, I don't know. I really, the thing about experiences of trauma is that your response can be delayed as a family member. You know, the immediate trauma and the crisis, and then there's sort of like, I got this training on Lakota mental health and how a trauma happens, and then you have the immediate crisis and safety issues response, and then you have sort of the refraction of that, and then that trauma plays out in different ways for different people. But I think that if you are raw, and if you are dealing with your own crisis, the best thing you can do is deal with that, you know, and not offer up your help or advocacy, because, you know, we got a lot of wounded warriors out there, but we need some healed ones and healing ones, right? Like, and sometimes you just can't work on certain things. You have to turn away from it. I was asked to help a family, and I found out that there was a lot of meth and domestic violence involved in that family. And they were victims of crime, and it is horrible and unjust what's happening to them. But I don't have the hands to deal with a family who's enduring that, in addition to what they were asking for assistance on around violence. So you gotta recognize what you got hands for. You know, I mean, we had hands to cook 10,000 meals. Lots of hands. And that was something that really went, you know, everyone needs food. But we don't all necessarily have the hands, right, to like mount a lawsuit. We don't have the hands necessarily to deal with homicides, you know. I know personally I don't have the hands to deal with going out on searches for missing women or children. I like physically, I don't have the hands for it. And funny I bring up hands, I've had this eczema issue. It's for this pandemic. And it really causes me pain sometimes. Or I don't want to be on a call, or I get irritable or something. It's really a difference for me. But now I pay attention to my hands. If they're weeping and itching and I'm hurting, I pay attention to that and I'll withdraw a little bit to afford myself self-care and space. Also, all of us are constantly in mourning a lot of times. And we have to regard that as, washigla. So we're in mourning, but the appeals time you lost your case. Your appeal told out at 10 days or 30 days. They got timelines in the tolling of the legal system. That has nothing to do with trauma. Some laws are on the front end of trying to say, if you discover your sexual abuse, like a memory type thing, then you can report it to the police and then you can write and pursue legal remedies. So there's an opening up and a recognition of how trauma changes time, changes memory. And so I think that's good and positive, and we can participate in those efforts too. But yeah, measure what you got hands for. If I can't carry my own family, a lot of people put themselves out there and they got a chaotic family. I'm not talking about all our cousins and my siblings, I'm talking the house, right there. And it, I don't, for instance, I don't follow no man leader who can't hold down a marriage. I'm not talking about divorce. I'm talking about these men who just keep, have children with 5, 6 women, and he's not my leader. Maybe he's leader of his little deal and his children, but he ain't my leader. That's not Nacha. That's not Itanchan, no. And when and the thing is, it's a judgment call, and I was kind of laughing with Muffy's like, the judgment, we need to bring down those walls of judgment. We need to bring down things that block conversation and communication and healing. But we do have a whole plethora of judges who are judging us and judging our people every day, in and out of that courtroom. And my brother, who's in and out of prison, young brother, and he definitely has mental health issues. He's like, only God can judge me, with his Tupac thing or whatever. And I love Tupac, but only God can judge me. And I was like, yeah, God and the judge you're going to appear before. The judge will judge you. Let's be prepared for that, Amy wanted to say something, and then the gentleman in the red flannel wanted to yell it out. Sure.
Just want to say that the meals to relatives and everything that we did that year during the pandemic, I think did just as much for us as we did for all the relatives that we're helping. And so I was always just grateful for you and that effort and all the people we got to meet.
Yes.
And, we had drivers that come pick up food and drop off groceries. Like, we just met a lot of different people I probably wouldn't have otherwise met. So just appreciate you much getting that effort. But I wanted to, so it's kind of switching my hat. I've done a lot of advocacy with Indian Ed in the Rapid City Area School District, and know for a fact that even when faced with data that they are violating rights, and like one being for a kid with medical needs, that the parent who was the city attorney at the time, who was downstairs, went upstairs and was like, this is a violation. Like, and they're like, oh, okay. And she was like, no, seriously, like, fix this. They didn't fix it, and she was like, hey, courtesy, I'm gonna, do something about this. I'm gonna file a complaint. And they were like, oh, okay, yeah, maybe talk to your principal. She's like, no, I went all the way. We're here. This is a violation. They still didn't do anything, so she filed a complaint. And then they were like, then they came back to her, what do you want to do? And she was like, I had a freaking time. I told you 3 times. I gave you courtesy because I was downstairs. I'm an attorney. Whatever. I tried to do it civilly. Her takeaway from that is that they won't do anything, even when it's a violation of, now it's a medical. And so she's like, I won't even get into the OCR complaints and like the violation of rights of families and children within the school district. And so I gave up. So I was on the PAC board trying to organize through there. I did, a few years ago, we decided not to sign their grant, and they needed my signature. And I was like, no, we didn't get all the information you asked for, so we're not going to do that. Forced them to have this task force. They found all of this data, looked at their own data, found out that Indian kids are on the wrong side of all of it. So all knew that. Highest dropout, highest referrals to law enforcement, lowest graduation, lowest academic achievement. And so we've been on the side, you know, we're just like, screw trying to be civil and work within the system here to help them, because we did. And I can honestly say I put a solid effort, my own time, and education and expertise into trying to help them if they don't want to change what they're doing. So we've been talking about organizing on the side, but everybody's like coalitioned out, and like, you know, like we can only have so many ways of organizing. And so I just wanted, with all of the different ways that you've been organizing, and I've been, you know, happy to be part of some of those and see the different ways that you've communicated. Can you just share some ways that people can organize themselves with people that have those same, so we have different people with different backgrounds, we have a couple lawyers, but how can we bring everybody together? What has been the most effective way to bring people together, but then also address the issue and try to create some
Food.
Food, yes. So one example is when I would ask people, hey, we need somebody to make 30 meals today. And it got more formalized, you know, you were all part of those chats too, right? Or a number of people here were, and or follow me on Facebook and saw how I coordinated that. But it really was about meeting people where they were at. So like we had cooks sometimes who were quite wealthy and, you know, very connected to good food sources in the Black Hills. They were, and so, you know, they would pay for everything. But for like, you know, just normal chick on hanging out in what is that? Sundial. I was going to use a nickname. In Sundial, you know, we're like, hey, we'll bring you the meat, we'll bring you the veggies, you know. We got everything for you. We got wild rice right here. You know, cook what you need. And then we were able to get really devoted cooks because they knew that they would be supplied and it would be taken from their own family, you know. And then there was just like sort of the natural way that many of us are, is that we cook for 10 or 12 people regardless for every meal. And so we really just started off with that, meeting people where they were at. As I started to hear that people were getting sick, I was like, okay, well I have extra food today, so we'll just package it up. You know, one of the things that came to our, wow, people need containers. That's the biggest issue. And you'd say, I got food, but I need containers. Okay. So then we order the containers, drop those off, and deliver them. I call mine, what we did is like social distance organizing, because we really did do it that way. And we tried to meet people where they were at with their resources and not make assumptions about what they were coming to the table with, or the kitchen. And also is, I think, is not playing into cliquishness and branding. And I'm comfortable being sort of an outsider or outlier. I don't, I come from like a really common family. I know a lot of us do, but like, you know, very regular folks were not like, you know, we weren't the first ones to have ribbon skirts, you know? And like, I think that matters how you present yourself to the world and how you want to plug people into your world, you know? And I would try to make it as inclusive as a space as possible so that you didn't feel like it was clicking up, that you felt like it was more about just trying to get this done. And that's why people appreciated it. It was all business. It was like, here's your food, here's your container, let's go, let's go. And my overall philosophy on organizing is whatever gets you up in the morning, whatever can get you to that meeting, that's what that energy, bringing that energy. Because it's so precious when you have all these people who are willing to engage and do it, and when they're motivated, you know. So whatever you can to keep that motivation going is what you need to do to keep your organizing growing, you know. And record keeping, you know, making sure you have a place to contact people. I was really bad about certain aspects, you know, and strengths and weaknesses and all that, but you can't deny what we did. You know, and that's what it was, is we put the emphasis on the doing, not necessarily the messy way we got to the doing, you know. And I couldn't have done it without everyone who was really devoted to it as well, because we were all like, we don't want anyone to die, we don't want to die. And these services with the brochures ain't gonna meet our needs. People need food, they need toilet paper. We want them to stay home and quarantine and care, so. I'll just shorten that. And then, did you want to say something? Yes.
Yeah.
Feel free.
I feel like it kind of goes into what you were just saying about like organizing people in general. And I guess the question that I have is, with the boarding school initiative, I forget what exactly it's called, but you know, all of that information that's coming to light, and with things like you mentioned, like this statute of limitations that they put on, you know, suing and having any sort of like healing of momentum and energy, but it's at least the light on it, to overturn things like that, or to like gain ground in some of that type of work. And yeah.
I think unity is overrated as a concept, but I say it with really big reservations. But we do need to unite, but not to the point of like fascist total agreement. It's like, you know, we don't. The one thing I saw on the side of a coffee cart one time, and I was like 24, and I was in the state capitol, and I was doing this fellowship, and it stayed with me my whole life, and it's that cooperation is not the absence of conflict. Cooperation is a means of managing it. So all of us here in this room have made an agreement to cooperate, you know. At the same time, I don't have to cooperate with somebody who's a rapist, and I don't. And that's where I think the woman leadership comes in, where we have to set those standards of, well, I don't know, he's been accused, or I've heard, or whatever. No. I mean, I don't take action on a rumor. We take action on repeated offenders. And I want to be in coalition with those people. So you won't see me doing that, you know, and I pass up those photo ops, and I think it's important if you're putting yourself out as a leader, the way in which you put yourself out is how, you know, you're going to organize with your people, you know. And real recognize real. People have that sense that you're not there. You know, you have to check your own intentions and your own mindfulness as you go into organizing work, because you can harm people when you're organizing too, even for a good cause.
Wait, and then Allison.
I can't reach it, that's okay. I think, maybe I can. Just three things come to mind. Tojan, one is that when you come to a meeting, ask people, and I learned this through 12 years of Keystone Pipeline. And so the question is, when people come, what is your role? Why did you come today? Because then you delineate, if it's a mom that just wants justice for her child, then that's their role. You don't have to push them into leading a march, because they just want to grieve. They're afraid. They want to find their child. So you have to be cognizant and respectful of that. And then the other thing, whoever's organizing, you have to know what your role is, because if it's out of the scope of your ability, then you need to assess that. Because I saw that happen a lot in the Keystone Pipeline. Some of them wanted just to be on Facebook. And so just ask them what the role is. And then the other thing is to debrief. Who is leading the meeting, debrief and talk about what was okay and what wasn't. One of the biggest things that we have found, and it's part of the work, is trying to set ground rules at the beginning of a gathering and ask the question, what happens if there's a perpetrator in the audience and it's documented and he's at your meeting or she's at your meeting? What are you going to do? We just gossip about it, like she said, a lot of gossip. But you got to have some ground rules, because it happens, it's probably happening here. So you have to talk about some things with your small group. And then you can't take everything on. In that 12 years of fighting the pipeline, we had one common unified goal, which made it easier, is we wanted to defend the water and stop the pipeline. And we did. And so there were so many trials and tribulations with the Washichu farmers and ranchers. Oh my gosh, they just give me headaches. But we got through it, and because we had to make them cry in order to make them remember they were human. So you will have groups that, this association that you're talking about, we're really good at that. We disassociate when we gossip. We disassociate when we don't unify, when we attack each other, when we compete with each other. That all goes down to our fear that I'm afraid. And the biggest thing that's going to combat our trauma is a sense of safety. So if you're organizing something, you got to make an effort to make that place safe. That's your big job, because it's at that point, if I'm going to say anything, I need to feel safe, or I won't say anything. So just add that.
Man, that was cool. Woo!
Thank you, Joy. I took notes. I hope everyone else did.
So one of the projects I'm working on is the tech with the orphanage. And the Sisters in Wampanoag, they had a orphanage on our reservation who potentially trafficked tens of thousands of potential members off of our reservation by first-hand removal and then the next 2-3 generations after. So one thing, I mean, you asked a question about advocacy. One thing, and I'm just gonna tell everybody this. Considering you're in this room, you've already become an advocate for your cause, for your people, for our nation. You know, you have the gumption and the goal to show up. And we know this and we see this right now. And another thing that I've learned is that no one's talking to the Congress people. No one's talking to the governor's office. No one's doing all these things. So if you want to, just do it. Just do it. Call them up yourself. Do it. We've learned how these two have been in peer numerous times, advocating at committees and stuff. Natalie, of course, is who she is. But on my role, I've been involved long enough where I'm just like, screw it, I'll fucking call them myself.
Yeah.
And we have to get to that point because no one else is going to do it. But that's where we are. We're talking about how we're not unified. We're talking about the division and all this stuff. Well, then it's going to be up to people in this room to just fucking do it. That's basically as much as it is. You mentioned House Resolution 5444. Dusty Johnson's office, I work closely with Dusty Johnson's staffers and stuff, and what we ended up finding out is that no one reached out when he put an amendment on a land committee meeting where they ended up sliding in the repatriation of our people on not just Carlisle land, but any other thing by the, what am I thinking of? Federal lands. Anyway,
DQ, just kidding.
No, Army Corps land is what I was thinking.
Yep.
But so they reached out to me and was like, can you post about this? Can you make a TikTok? Within like a couple of days, I had 10,000 views on a video on TikTok, and I was the only one talking about it. And then I went and I talked to a state representative who said, I'm really glad that you're taking this up. And I don't know how you guys feel, but that is the most exhausting thing anyone can say to anyone, is that I'm glad that you're doing this. Because deep down, the rest of us who are real and in our spots and where we're doing, we got imposter syndrome, like big time. And it's like, I shouldn't be the one who has to do this.
Yeah.
We have these tribal leaders, we got IRA governments, we got all these things in place that are supposed to be advocating for us, but yet here we are. So the best advice that I could give to all of you guys is to just freaking do it.
Yeah.
Just do it. If you have more than 10 people behind you, you're representing people, whatever it is, because at this point in now, we've lost so many relatives, we have to create our own families, we got to create our own support systems. So if you have a dozen people behind you who will support you and rally for you, then just do it. Do it, because we can.
Yep. Thank you.
Oh, there you go.
That's on a great note, Allison. Thank you. I don't know about how much time we have, but if there's a comment or question, are we ready to go? Should go early and I'll be that cool presenter?
I think you're overtime.
Okay, Johnny. Go ahead.
Considering just how interconnected everything is and how white supremacy is everywhere, as it pertains to foster care criminal system, have many different cases. And I just wanted to get your take within your experience in the legal setting, community setting, and if you can identify or name the place where white supremacy is and where maybe the most vulnerable in our own community. It may not be like that, that cornerstone, but the other parts of the spaces, for me, they're not that serious. Real progress can be made. So I think when you do it at the face, like, oh, this is a lot. So just want to see if you have any thoughts about like where is white supremacy most vulnerable?
Well, it's an interesting way you frame the question. So we're asking about safety from white supremacy, right? And productive spaces away from white supremacy. And I think it's like, I don't know, for me, it's like a lifelong, across my life, across time, and across spaces, that trying to create that space. I want to share that, like, I grew up in Southern California, and I was educated there. My undergrad's from UCLA, my law degree's from UCLA. And one of the things that, like, really disturbed me in coming to live in South Dakota is how little opportunity is afforded here. And you can see it, you can feel it, you can taste it. And how people who've lived here their whole lives often are fatigued. They're so tired of it. And then you have your uncle who just like misses out over the bad waitress, and you're just like, oh, you know, and you have to create the time. So I think if you look at white supremacy as like a system and a structure, and then you look at ways in which there's macroaggressions and there's microaggressions going on towards us as non-white people or as racialized people, I think that if you make a conscious effort to create that space, like say we are here, like this conference is doing, you know, that we can begin to see those spaces bear the fruit and to accomplish and make and meet the ideas of progress that we have, you know. I mean, like for me, I'm cool. I'm like the first woman in probably 5 generations who's not an alcoholic, you know, in my family.
Woo, that's good.
You know, other people have different measures. They're not going to experience that domestic violence again. I know a lot of people break that cycle because they were raised seeing it and decide to break it, you know. I don't like break the cycle language necessarily, but I just use it for convenience sake, you know. I think though that the acknowledgement that the weight of white supremacy is an ongoing one, and the burden is ongoing. There's that old historical phrase of the white man's burden, but I think we're dealing with the white supremacy burden at all times. And so creating spaces where we don't feel that burden is indeed possible. You know, Stone here and Johnny and from 7th Gen and Kimberly, I'm sure was in there, helped us to have a birth circle gathering in August in the Black Hills. And we put aside certain things. I told the coordinator, like, we probably need a schedule or something to document that this happened, and we might need an agenda, and we'll hit those marks. But you know, we didn't conform to hard and fast ways of conducting our business. And I see that where the things we have control over, we don't indigenize or actively try to decolonize. You know. Spaces, I know a number of you guys have little ones, you know, and we'd have a different gathering if there were little ones here that we needed to all care for and tune into, you know. So I'm hopeful, and because I have helped to create those spaces, and I think on an organizational sense or advocate tip, you have to be conscious about creating those spaces. And I don't, and I also, you know, it's not like, it should be easy, but it's not. But people, we need to make the time to rest. Gosh, if there's anything like, I look at the Halloween schedule for my community in Rapid City and I'm exhausted. I'm like, I didn't even go to any of them, I'm just looking at flyers and I'm like, what are people doing? Like, we're over-programming. You know, we're over-programming, like, let's give each other a break. Have one big Halloween gathering. And I'm just like, you spiritual leaders are like, we used to have one Sundance. But, you know, not 500. But that's how I think we can create spaces with rest, with consciousness, you know, and And again, I'm coming back to the males have had their run. The men, our men, would thank you got us here. We're here at Crazy Horse Memorial, and I don't know, I guess he would have, I don't think that he would have liked his image blasted into the rock. I think we all know that. But it's turned into something important to the community and an important gathering space. And my cousin Whitney is the ED, and he's the first Ocheti Shakome to do so, and so I'm proud of him. And so, but yeah, we need to create those spaces. I create them in my home, and that's why when I talk to my educator friends, I'm like, I don't need y'all teaching my kid how to bead or smudge or powwow or anything or sew. They got this culture night every night up in my pad, so I want my kid to learn to read and write and arithmetic and compete outside my home when she's gonna need that. So I'm not seeing anyone waving anymore, except bye. And
Go ahead.
You know, thank you, Natalie. You know, I have a answer to what you just asked, and the vulnerability of white supremacy is, and we've seen it. You know, Liz Cheney, she was a bona fide, hardcore, Republican, and here she went against Donald Trump. The vulnerability of white supremacy is to get these women, go to the woman of those white supremacists and sit down. No man is going to change because he sees that, what would they call it, the Constitution, those rocks that George Washington, that were Mount Rushmore, all those presidents are standing up there. They carved all those constitutional laws, but they never asked a woman. And the vulnerability is the woman. And to change anything, we have to talk to those women. My wife and I have sat in on too many, and I mean that, too many all white men around the table. There was no women involved in any of those things. And we got called a lot of bad things, but we stood our ground. We buckled down, and you know, Felipa was in tears, and I said, there's no crying, you know, but I want you to know that that vulnerability is the woman. And I think if we start going to these white supremacist women as women and talking to them from that circle, not that straight line which represents the Constitution. We got to talk from the womb, the circle that we all came out of. Even a man came out of a woman in that circle. He was a circle. And he's got to quit thinking in that straight line. He's got to bring himself back to a circle, and it's going to take women, a white supremacist wife. They're the vulnerable ones. And that's who I think we're going to start really getting in there, and we're going to make sure Amy Sazu and Natalie are with us when they're doing that, because these are some powerful women that understand that. And Allison, sitting at that table and not moving and budging, because we have a lot here in Rapid City that came to us and said, we didn't even know that. There was some white women that came up to us and said, you know, we were taught that Indians were bad. And meeting you two girls, I can't ever say that ever again. Like, cripes, what room office have you been in, you know? Holy cow. But yeah, I just wanted to mention that it's going to take a woman to take out that white supremacy. Just to adding.
Yeah. No, thank you. The myth is that the system is all powerful, and it's not. It's not all powerful. And there are spaces that we can exploit, take advantage of, create, and we can throw our elbows and throw our shoulders, and it's not easy to do. And you need to be clear-minded and sober, you know. You got to do it, you know. You got to be on point at every turn. So I'm very hopeful. I have an 8-year-old daughter, and I am very hopeful about her future. Now, the climate, not so hopeful for, but, you know, I'm very hopeful for her future and for the children. I know all y'all have, you know, they're gonna be built differently than we were. I grew up in the 90s, this is crazy, 80s and 90s. I look back and I'm like, wow, it's like really caveman stuff going on that was totally acceptable. You know, so there, you know, even as I feel like in the big numbers there isn't the progress, there is progress being made. But anyway, I'm accessible, and if you have any legal needs, I'll ask you, you got money? And if you don't, then I help you. If you do, I'm like, there's some jerk lawyers you could talk to, you know? They're mostly my friends too, but you want a lawyer who's a jerk. The other thing I would tell, just on the legal tip, is that when you take an organizing or community defense approach to meeting your legal needs, that's a different approach than the legal one. A lawyer will tell you, don't put that shit on social media. They're gonna tell you to be quiet. They're gonna tell you not to go to the media. So there's different approaches, and you have to decide what you wanna carry. Because there's no handing it off to an advocate. There's no handing it off to that lawyer. And then when I feel that weight being put on me, like I can solve all the problems, I know that that's not something that, you know, I can't address their needs. So, or we cannot, because I don't work alone. So anyway, again, Natalie Stites means thank you for joining me here today. It's still good to see so many friends and relatives too. So, and good luck, and let's all join forces.